by focusing always on how we appear. So not just trying to be, beautiful and sexy and attractive, but also, do I appear nice? Do I appear agreeable? All of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
By focusing on appearances, we become objects. But when we stay focused on our feelings about our lives and what we're doing and how our relationships are going, etc., that's when we stay in the position of being a subject in our own life.
Yeah.
And I mean, that book influenced me hugely. It took many years before I was able to actually apply the lessons fully. Because I found that for myself, the first step was realizing, oh yeah, that's the problem here. I identify as an object.
Hello and welcome back to the F.E.E.L Podcast today. I'm your host, Melissa Crook. I've got a new friend here with me. I met through our good friends at Podmatch. I'm always thankful for those connections. They're always such a powerful, impactful group of women that I get connected with there. So I'm always thankful for that. Kristin Duncombe is here with me today, and she describes herself as impulsive, determined, disorganized, an extroverted, friendly introvert, and thoughtful. I love those. I love all the combinations and the nuance of those. Kristin, welcome to the F.E.E.L Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate being here. It's great to see you again, Melissa.
Absolutely. You too. All right. When you introduced yourself to me on Podmatch, the first thing that jumped out to me that I loved, and we're going to go into our first talking point here in a minute, but how you really help and support women and advocate for women to be the subjects of their own lives instead of the objects that the patriarchy historically for thousands of years has tried to put us in those boxes. And I love that so much because I think it speaks to your passion, your values, what you care about. Talk to me about your self-care journey in realizing that this was true for you and you were going to be the definer of this, because it's been a journey for you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I always like to give credit where credit is due. So I want to shout out to the author who introduced this concept to me about being the subject of your own life versus the object of someone else's life. And that's Holly Young Eisendrath. There's a terrific book. Now it's maybe 25 years old, but it's timeless. It's called Women and Desire, Beyond Wanting to Be Wanted.
Oh.
And that book literally jumped off the shelf at me when my marriage had fallen apart. I was on my own with my little toddler. She was 2 at the time. She's about to turn 26. So that was about 24 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had left my husband because I had found out that he was having an affair. And I was completely lost. And this book jumped out at me and it introduced me to this concept that women, because of the way we're conditioned and because of the way the patriarchal society works, we invest an inordinate amount of time in trying to be pleasing to other people, trying to be wanted, trying to be desirable, as opposed to staying connected to what our own true feelings and desires are.
Yeah.
So by focusing always on how we appear, so not just trying to be, beautiful and sexy and attractive, but also, do I appear nice? Do I appear agreeable? All of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
By focusing on appearances, we become objects. But when we stay focused on our feelings about our lives and what we're doing and how our relationships are going, etc., that's when we stay in the position of being a subject in our own life.
Yeah.
And I mean, that book influenced me hugely. It took many years before I was able to actually apply the lessons fully. Because I found that for myself, the first step was realizing, oh yeah, that's the problem here. I identify as an object. I didn't have that language before then. So I was 32
Yeah.
years old when I read that book. I, like so many women, have a history of sexual abuse. I grew up seeing myself, again, without having the language, but seeing myself as an object,
Yeah.
there to please guys and, to make sure that guys wanted me, etc. And that, it almost sounds glib to present it in those terms, but I don't mean it in a glib way. I mean that I think that my desire to be chosen by men and to be wanted by men, it set my life on a course that was not in my best interests.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You set that out so well. And this is a very common theme for women across the world. Like we get scripts very early on in life about what is and isn't acceptable. Your popularity as you're growing up in high school is based on so many of those themes: junior high, college, society. All of these things are these underlying and then the reason I will tell you, you see so many women competing and pitting themselves against each other, especially if they feel somebody's after my man or you're blah, blah, blah. It's because none of us were living out of actually who we are and just trusting if I show up as my true self, because we were never invited to, that was never encouraged.
Exactly.
And so we never had the moment at that point in life to entertain the thought, if I just show up as my truest, most authentic self, the people that I'm meant to be in association with, in relationship with, will be drawn to me and I'll be drawn to them. And I'm going to trust that and not all these other scripts of how I need to show up, how I need to present, what I need to look like, what I should be wearing, how I should smell. Am I agreeable? Am I too disagreeable? Yeah. Am I too angry?
Am I accommodating?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it comes in all different forms but it's that underlying kind of rhythm that's there that's very disruptive. And I feel like most of the time women have a wake up moment during their lives of like, this script is not serving me. And too many times it is a moment of abruptness, tragedy, despair, upset, a meltdown. All kinds of different ways, because we can only go so long living out of touch with ourselves before all of the stuffed emotions, stuffed frustrations, stuffed irritabilities, shame, all those things we carry that don't align with the script come bubbling over. And they can come bubbling over in really harmful ways if we're not able to get in connection with them, allow them the room to breathe and be processed, healed from, and then allow ourselves to actually accept and invite in who we were always supposed to be. It's a whole process.
Exactly.
And so as you did this, as you uncovered this, at what point did you realize, wait a minute, it is time for me? You read the book. It was a wake up moment. We have these different moments. You had that wake up moment. It is time for me to be the definer of what my life looks like. It's time for me to prioritize me. That's not selfish. That's self-care. That's health-care. That is filling my cup so I can actually show up the way I was designed to in the world.
Yeah. Like I said, that the book was, it was a pivotal moment for me. And I read the book and I reread the book and I took notes and I thought about it. And I was not ready yet to fully identify as the subject of my own life. So, for example, I got back together with the husband that cheated on me. Which, by the way, I don't think that was the mistake of my life. I think that was a decision that I took, and I think that people can recover from infidelities. I went on to have a second child, which I wanted. And I would say that the first chapter of becoming the subject of my own life then was having a second child, even though I still had doubts about my marriage, I kept those doubts to myself, but I knew that I wanted to have another child and I wanted my children to have the same dad. I just thought it would make everything easier, because maybe I should mention for the listenership, because I have a complicated international life. So I'm American, but I've been an expat my entire life, even as a child. I live in France. My ex-husband is Argentinian. So I wanted another child, but I didn't want to add another complicated country situation. So I just knew that if I've got two with the same dad, like they will go to Argentina together, etc. So that I would say was one decision I made, realizing that even though I still have doubts about my marital situation, I can still go for the thing that I know is true for me, which is I do want to be mom to a second child. I do want my daughter to have a sibling. And then the other thing that quickly followed that is that I was in a situation of being what they call a trailing spouse. You know, I was raised by a trailing mother. My dad had a career with the Foreign Service, and my mom followed him around the world. I was in graduate school when I met my husband, who had a career in international humanitarian medicine, and he asked me right away, will you come with me? He worked for Doctors Without Borders. He wanted to know, will you suspend your plans and come with me? Here's the impulsive part. Without even thinking about it, I was like, sure. To me, that felt like the normal thing to do. So I abandoned my plans, became a trailing spouse. And so after I read that book, which again, I'll remind you, I found that book at a moment when my marriage had fallen apart. The next big act towards becoming the subject of my own life was that when my husband, who, as I said, I got back together with, when he wanted me to uproot my life and move again to follow him on his career, I said no. Because by then, you know, years had ticked by, but by then I had set up my life in Paris. I had a successful career. My children were in school. We had a good community of friends, and I didn't want to move again, especially after what had happened the first time. You know, that he was cheating on me, and the financial dependence when you give up your career. And so I said no, and I will never ever forget how radical an act this seemed at the time to say no. I'm not telling you. And for 18 months, we had a commuter marriage where, he moved to a city in southern France. That was a 2-hour train ride from Paris, and he would come back on the weekends. Sometimes we would go down and see him. And then the third moment of being the subject of my own life was when, after 18 months of this, he said to me, he's like, okay, listen, if you're not going to move, I am going to quit my job and come back to Paris, and I will go back to working with Doctors Without Borders. And when he told me that, it wasn't an ultimatum. He was just telling me how he saw things. But I was like, oh, wait a minute, because I knew what that meant for our family was back having a super bare bones salary. With his new job down south, he was having a much better income that, of course, had a benefit to the entire family. And so that was another moment where I just thought, you know what? I can do this. I can make a change. And so I did pack up and I moved down south with the kids. And then I started commuting back to Paris because I didn't want to give up my private practice. I'm a therapist. And after doing that for a year, I realized this is exhausting and I don't want to do it. But I'm just mentioning those things because there was another moment in time where I would never have dreamed of saying, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. You really started laying the groundwork for defining yourself and your expectations. You also started laying the groundwork with some healthy boundaries. You probably, I'm sure you didn't call them those, but you had some healthy boundaries of what some yeses and nos would be, some non-negotiables would be. You started, you know, these things that you had learned slowly started percolating and infiltrating into your life in all of a sudden ways that would have seemed impossibly audacious, years earlier, but now felt like, no, you had that sense. You knew what was right for you when you were trusting that.
Yes, indeed. And daring to say it because, and I don't want to paint my ex-husband out as some sort of ogre. It wasn't like that, but I can just tell you that, he comes from a quite macho culture where he's quietly patriarchal. I mean, he would probably disagree with that, but I'm sorry, he's an Argentinian man.
Yeah.
And I was raised in a family that was also quite patriarchal. I mean, my dad was in charge. My mom, she accepted that. There was no debate. She was of that generation where she wanted, the man to be in charge. Plus, my father worked for the Foreign Service, which is a totally patriarchal institution.
Sure.
And I had no model I did not have the model that I hope that I provided for my children, where my children see that I am a human being with skills and capacities, and sometimes I make mistakes, but that I am in charge of my own life.
Yeah. No one's defining you for you. You're defining you for you. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's such a beautiful example to set. And because it's what they see, it's what's modeled to you, but it takes, you at some point in these generations, as we make these transitions as women, we have to at some point take nope, that's not a road we're going down anymore.
Yeah.
And we're going to shift the narrative here. We're going to model and live something differently because we know this is actually what's healthiest for us. And that this other script is not serving us. And we don't want it to be the one that's sold to the generations moving forward. So you are able to make that shift, which is very courageous and very different. And it takes a little bit of moxie to no, this isn't serving me. It really does.
And you want to know something funny? This is, I can't believe I'm actually going to say this on air, but I do think it's interesting. And I think that a lot of women might relate to this. So I should also clarify, I'm actually still married. We just haven't bothered getting divorced. We have an amiable separation and we live in different countries and we have an administrative marriage and a decent enough friendship. And because of that, and now it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
Almost 10 years. Every now and again, if we have sort of a fun conversation about something or, a little bonding moment for whatever reason, I'll think to myself, oh, yeah, I kind of miss him. And then as quickly as I think that, I think, oh my God, both things can be true. You miss him for the good stuff about him, but if you had to live with that man again and start getting his permission and running things by him and having to function on his times table and then as quickly as I think, I miss him, I think, oh, thank God I don't have to be married any longer because something about that equation. I mean, I'd like to think that I would do it differently now that I'm older and wiser, but I just feel like it's so deeply ingrained. I feel that if I was back in a marital relationship, there I would be again, cooking dinner, waiting for someone to eat when they were ready and feeling like I should, the way it was in my marriage, if there was a TV program I wanted to watch, I would never turn the TV on until he was ready to watch it. I know this sounds crazy and I know that
but I think a lot of women live this way, even now.
Well, yeah.
It's
I'm in my 50s. And
I
was going to say, I think that in this age group, I see young people now, everyone like watches television on their computer. And so already the computer is a more individual experience. But I just think
Yeah.
that when I was still married, if I wanted to sit down and watch Breaking Bad, I felt like I cannot do it until he is home and has had his dinner and has told me that he is also ready to sit down and watch television. And I know this sounds like a silly example, but you know what? It's a great example of being not the subject of your own life and your own desires.
And when you're living like this day in and day out, and you know it's not authentic and honoring to you, it wears on you. It's
it's exhausting.
Those day-to-day things that wear on you. And I think, I mean, I'm 55. So I think our generation is finally like looking around going, you know, the way that we've seen our mothers and grandmothers and women before them operate does not feel healthy or authentic.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like it's actually serving us. And the reality is that we don't have to, those scripts are just scripts. And just because that's what we were told doesn't mean it's true. And it's time for us to become curious and invested in who we are and align ourselves with people who want to be like that too and honor that as well. So, I mean, I think, you know, that part of it is so true. And so talk to me about, because this leads nicely into when you have to live with those things day to day, those little impacts, it starts impacting your mental, emotional health, which then impacts your physical health if you're storing stuff up all the time. So talk to me about your experience with that.
You mean like when I was still married?
Yeah. Just before you really started breaking into starting to find your own journey, the impact that had day in and day out, mentally and emotionally.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, and I do always want to be careful because at least in my marriage, nothing was all bad. There was many good, happy elements to it.
Sure.
But I'm going to focus on the part that made me unhappy. Yeah, I just felt that I was always waiting on him because he has a very high pressure career in humanitarian medicine. He traveled a lot with his work. He was doing research. And there was an expectation that I would wait for him to make decisions about things, to do certain things, so that would be when he was traveling and off in the field. But when he was at home working at the office, like he would often work till 8:30 at night. And there would be an expectation that, of course, we were going to have dinner together, which meant that I had to wait, even though, the kids couldn't wait that long. So to speak of impacts, one of them was weight gain because I would eat dinner twice. I'd eat with the kids and then I'd eat again with him. And I did that to please him. I drank a lot more wine at that time because that also although that had more to do with, just loneliness. I mean, one of the things, I had what I would call kind of a lonely marriage. I felt very on my own with my kids. And truthfully, I want to clarify, I loved being on my own with my kids. So the loneliness part wasn't being alone with my kids. The loneliness part was having a partner that would come and go and wouldn't keep in touch while he was away. So we would go back and forth in between. I mean, and in fairness to him, we had many fights about this, but what he would always say to me is he'd be like, I'm off in like the jungle in Congo. Like it's hard for me to call you. And this was before, everyone had an iPhone and all of this, but
sure.
And it was just a difficult way to live. And then what would happen for me is then he would come home and just expect to walk right back in to a household that sort of had him as the patriarch. But the thing is, I was the patriarch and the matriarch. And that's where that subject object thing would come. Because, one of the things that we had a lot of fights about in our marriage, because he is a doctor, he would question my decision making about things. He'd be like, "What? You took this child or that child to the doctor and you started that antibiotic treatment and you didn't even run it by me." And I'd be like, "Okay, you might be the doctor, but I'm not an uneducated nincompoop. Like, I'm the mother. I'm Dr. Mama, and I am the one that has been here with a sick child. And I don't want to have to ask your permission to follow doctor's orders." So it was things like that where, we get into these. Yeah. Anyways, it's so funny. I cannot believe I'm speaking so much about my marriage. I did not think that that's what I was going to land on. But since we're talking about, subject versus object, it is really true that when I finally left my marriage, I felt like suddenly I got to be the subject of my own life for the first time. And there was a lot of scary things that came along with that as well. Like, for example, and these are some of the moments when I really missed my husband, but like being the subject meant that when the sink broke, it was my sink and I had to figure out how to fix it. And I had to pay my bills. And I broke out of this dependency model and had to learn how to do things that I had traditionally. And so one of the things, speaking of being a subject versus an object, is I got to do something that I had always wanted to do when I was still married, but he refused. And that was pay someone to do the damn taxes. Because But that it would just, and bless his heart, because he's very, parsimonious and saved. And so he'd be like, "I'm not going to spend money on something that I can do myself." But then like entire weekends would disappear into him doing the paperwork. And I'd be like, "Can't we just like hire that dude for $400?" No. And so I found it very daunting when I was first on my own, because I still was in that idea like, "Oh, now I have to be him." But then I was like, "No, now I get to be me." Called, SOS taxes, SOS plumber. It's like, I am going to pay to get things done because I get to decide, because according to me, that is a good use of money, not a bad use of money.
And time, and time. Absolutely.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And this really goes into where you really started showing up unapologetically for you, which then now enables you to also show up and support other women in their quest to live unapologetically as themselves.
Yes.
So talk to me about that transition of understanding, not only am I doing this, but I can also support other women in doing this.
Yes. Well, what is so interesting, and I think about this a lot even today, is that the cart was before the horse. Because truthfully, in my life as a therapist, I had already been cheerleading and championing women who were trying to be the subjects of their own lives, because I was living with that double standard. It was okay for other people. It just wasn't okay for me. And because I was very good at playing a role of someone who seemingly had it all together, I was able to convince myself that I was also living in service of my own values, because, in some ways I was.
Sure.
But so it wasn't in me learning to be the subject of my own life that I started being able to support other women and being the subjects of their own lives. I was already doing that. I just wasn't doing it for me. Like I said, double standard. And that's been one of the biggest mysteries of my adult life was, practicing as a therapist for 20 years without actually realizing and identifying in myself that what I have is complex trauma. So, I was explaining this to someone else. I think it's the best way to frame it. Like, I was very much psychologically stuck at age 10, 11, and 12. I was sexually abused for 3 years by one of my father's colleagues, a senior diplomat at USAID, which was then covered up by the State Department. And that abuse defined not me, the whole person, but part of me, the part of me that how I related to men was stuck in a child's mind. But it took me many, many years, and finally leaving my marriage, to realize that the problem I have, and the reason I cannot be the subject of my own life, is because every time I interact with men, not, my child's teacher, or not, a client, but in the romantic sphere, instantly what should be this turns into this, because I see myself as a child and I see them as the adult.
Yeah.
And so even if they are trying to be equitable, it's me doing that. I'm the one that did that to myself.
Sure.
And it took me a long time to realize that I was stuck in that child mode. But when I realized that, then things changed super quickly.
Yeah. It's so interesting how you can be working in a certain area, but still be so disassociated from your own reality.
Yes.
And I think this happens more than we realize sometimes. It's like you can be handing out all the right information to everyone else, but yet when you're confronted with this in your own life, you're like, no, that's not how I operate. Or no, this is what works best for us. And this is how we make things work. I mean, you find all kinds of ways around it. Talk to me about, this really became the point where you really not only were living out of your values, but you were able to, I would imagine, tap into what your why was, not the why that had been set out in front of you of how you showed up. And because your why wasn't, and values weren't just about showing up for other women. It started being about showing up for you.
Yes. Well, you know what, for me, and actually more specifically, it had a lot to do with my daughter. Because what happened is, so my children have almost a 6-year gap. So when my son was born, he's my second, my daughter was almost 6 years old.
Okay.
And so when my kids were little, that was when we had our first bout with commuter marriage, where my husband was in one city and I was in another city with the kids, managing everything on my own, and then often facing recrimination, like for not asking him. And I used to say to him, I'd be like, aren't you happy that I'm like smart and independent and able to manage things?
Yeah. And
in theory, he would say yes, but I was still constantly like sort of in trouble for not, for not. I mean, fortunately, I'm sure he will not listen to this podcast, because I'm sure he would object to what I'm saying. And again, I want to reiterate, he's not like an ogre. It's just, you get into relationships with people and it becomes very, very complicated. But what I was going to say about my daughter and my why is that as my daughter moved into adolescence, she started having a lot of questions. She and I have always been extremely close. And she started having a lot of questions, very good questions, not asked in anger, not asked confrontationally, but just things like why such and such thing was so difficult for me. Like one really good example is that, so we were, because of my husband's career. So I said that we had moved down to a city in southern France. And then after that, we moved to Geneva, Switzerland, because of his work. And while we were living in Geneva, And I was again busy recreating my life, recreating my private practice. My daughter, who was 16 at that time, was thinking about university. And she wanted to go look at university programs in the UK because she was pretty certain that she wanted to go to university in English. I mean, English is her mother tongue. And I mean, it's just so crazy now when I think about this, because see, the me of today would never even be a thing. But at that time, and so this was, again, this was 10 years ago, because like I said, my daughter's about to turn 26, and this was when she was 16. I wanted to take her to the UK. It's a 1-hour flight from Geneva to get to London. And I wanted to go to the UK and see universities and take the train here, there, everywhere, take, 4 or 5 nights, stay in hotels or bed and breakfast, and do a little university tour. Because I wanted to support her in realizing her desire to go to university in the UK. But my husband was categorically opposed to her going to the UK because he, if you know anything about Argentinian history, many people don't know about this, but there was a battle between the UK and Argentina over the folks in the UK call it the Falkland Islands. The Argentinians call it Las Malvinas, the Islas Malvinas. And my husband is a feuder. He feuds, and he has never forgiven the UK for the battle over the Islas Malvinas and all the people that died. And so he was like, that's no way is my child going to go to university in the UK. And this was when I really had to start learning to stand up, because what I had to say to him was, I'm sorry, our daughter identifies as Anglophone. Yes, she's trilingual. She grew up in France. Her dad is Spanish speaking, but her mother tongue is English. And she wants to go to university in the UK. And I don't agree with you. Like, you want to put your foot down about this, but just because you don't agree with it, that means that that's the final ruling. Like, I disagree. I think that she should get to explore that option of going to university in the UK. And so my daughter, she was like, wait, this is a problem? And I was like, yeah, this is a huge problem. And I'm going to have to take a decision to go against his wishes and go off to the UK with you and go on a university tour. And okay, let's do it. But it was like a breaking point. It wasn't breaking point that brought the marriage
Things had
down.
been building up. Sure.
It was a breaking point. And it was things like that as she was becoming a young woman with her own desires. And I saw him standing in the way of some of her dreams and desires because of his own prejudices. And I was just like, okay, wait, whose side am I going to be on here? Am I going to be the unified parental unit when I totally disagree with him? Or am I going to take my daughter's side and advocate for her and tell him to buzz off? And that is what ended up happening.
Yeah.
And it was a series of things like that which led to the end of our marriage.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's one of those things you were able to identify this isn't what's healthiest for her. It also is an example of how deeply entrenched cultural narratives are. Cultural narratives of how men and women are supposed to show up in the world. And when you're deeply entrenched in a cultural narrative and someone addresses like, it's really like you operate this way and you don't trust me to operate this way. And you can't see it because it's just seen as normal because that's the way you've always seen it. And you've been told it's the only way to be. And those cultural narratives are very difficult to navigate and break through when you're on the other side of it and you're like, this is not what's best and healthiest for everyone. because there's, this is not the time and place for us to come together as a unit, unified, because this isn't actually what's healthy for her.
Right.
And
exactly.
And this system that he's been a part of is clouding his ability to, instead of just thinking he always knows what's best, which is what's been modeled to him throughout his life and history and family, being able to see that, no, this other thing, even though I've got some personal connections to it, she doesn't. And this might actually be, but that's tricky. So that became a real defining point, not only for, and really a moment for her too, where that's a pivotal change. And I think sometimes those things, when you're seeing like, oh no, he's trying to play this patriarchal role in her life now, not just mine.
Yeah.
And no, we have to stop this. This cannot keep going like this. Yeah.
But it's so interesting because just going back to that moment, I mean, I remember then when we, went off to the UK, and I felt it was like being on fire in terms of excitement. Like I had broken free, but also fear, like, oh my God, I broke free. I'm in trouble. And I remember, I remember vividly how it felt walking down, one of the places we went was Edinburgh. So walking in Edinburgh and walking in Bath and, these beautiful, and walking arm in arm, and she was, so young and wide-eyed and thinking about her future. And I was there thinking like, oh my God, what have I done? I sort of knew I'm not coming back from this.
Yeah. This is a turning point.
Yes. Yeah. But it still wasn't the turning point, but it was one of like the stepping stones to the major turning point. The stepping stones kept getting bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. So going into living out of your own expectations versus others, this was, you've had steps in that. We've heard your journey. We've seen you take these steps as you've started to define this for yourself throughout time. What was that final point that was like, nope, this is a non-negotiable. I will not allow anyone else to tell me what they expect of me and live out of that. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to abandon myself that way anymore.
Yes. Well, and I love the way you phrased the question. It's actually the perfect phrasing of the question because, and oh my gosh, I'm going to answer that question and it is going to sound so nuts. Even to this day, I go, wow, I can't believe that was me, but it was me. And it is just the perfect example of identifying as the object versus the subject. So I have mentioned in the story that I just told that my husband, hates the UK and holds a grudge against them. Well, there's a story that's even bigger than that one in his life. And that is that he is rabidly anti-American. Now, yes, I am American, and he did marry an American woman, but the condition I agreed to when I was busy being the object and not the subject, I agreed that because he absolutely has no tolerance for the United States of America, I agreed that we would leave the United States and never go back. I was allowed to go and, visit on my own, but I agreed to a marriage that would not include my culture or country in it.
Yeah.
And so, as I was mentioning, I spent a lot of time alone with my kids, and I'm super close to both of my kids. And I spoke English to my kids. I shared, American culture with my kids, Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Bear in the Big Blue House, like all of those references.
Yeah.
Michael Jackson. I mean, just all the,
Yeah.
Mac and cheese, I transmitted my culture to my children because that's what we do. It wasn't something I had to think about. It's just what you do.
Yeah.
And I did take my kids to the States every year to see their grandparents. We usually would go because in France, the kids have 2 weeks off around Halloween time. So we would always go for the two saint holidays. And that became my parents at the time lived in Washington, D.C. And, that became my kids' American experience going to Washington, D.C. But then my daughter, this was before she was 16. This was when she was, it was the precursor. It was when she was 15. It was our last year living in France. She, in her history class or in her French school, they had to study the rêve américain, the American dream. And she had to do a book report on the rêve américain. And that led her into learning some things about Jack Kerouac on the road. And then we started talking about this concept of the great American road trip. And both of my kids, Mom, can we do it in the Grand Canyon and California? And because they knew Washington and they had been to New York, but it was like, wow, imagine that. And so I proposed to my husband that we take the kids on the great American road trip. And he refused. He said that he would not spend a dime on that diabolical place. And, he said how awful it was that, like, what kind of person plans a family vacation that doesn't include every member of the family? This is how my book Object starts.
Yeah.
That was the pivot point because I said, but I'm begging you to come. It's not that I've planned a vacation that doesn't include you. I'm begging you to come with me, accompany me. And he said no. And I cracked in that moment, and I wasn't planning it. I never thought I would do it, but I just said to him, you know what? I can't do this any longer. I want to separate. And that was the moment that I told him that I was leaving him. It was 20 years in, and I took my kids on the Great American Road Trip. And to this day, my daughter had her 17th birthday in Seattle, Washington. My son was 11. And to this day, they both talk about the Great American Road Trip. We drove almost 8,000 miles in a zigzag. And it was such a beautiful, informative moment. It was such an amazing summer. We spent the whole summer inside. I was terrified. I couldn't believe that I had left my marriage. I just couldn't believe I had done it. But I did it. And that was the moment. Moment.
Yeah. And I think too, I think it's important to point out that fear is a very common emotion in these situations, because you can both know something is the best and healthiest thing for you and be terrified because you haven't navigated it on your own before. Like there is that, the both can be true. Yeah. And it's that and so, I think that it's really important that we can hold both of those truths within that, you know? And I think that, so powerful. So I have to believe that learning to accept and embrace all of your layers as you went through this journey and made these decisions has been a big part of your journey as well. Can you talk about that more?
Yeah. So, okay, when you say the layers, which layers are you thinking of? Because
I'm thinking all of the pieces and parts that make up who you are, the decisions you love, the decisions you don't, the things that happened that were terrible. But we all, at some point, we have to come to we don't have to love our layers, all of them, but we have to come to an acknowledgement of them and give ourselves grace and approach them with curiosity rather than judgment and shame for the things that we wish hadn't happened or, you know, and so getting to that point, because I really, for me, that was a pivotal point in knowing my value, that regardless of all these layers, the ones that I love, don't love, all these things. I am inherently valuable. I have learned in the areas of my life that things happened or decisions were made that I didn't love. I can see how that happened in that season I was in life based on who taught me, what I was surrounded with, the narratives that were in place. And so, being able to kind of put on, almost like somebody gave me a really great analogy yesterday, almost like putting your life up on a movie screen and taking yourself out of it for a moment, but looking at it and being like, oh yeah, I mean, that was tough, but I can see why that happened. Or, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, I was going to say that I think that one of the things that I think a lot about this, and it's interesting going back to sort of connecting back to that question about how what I learned, how I've been able to use that with the people that I work with in therapy. And I started out by saying, but I could see it in other people's lives when I couldn't see it in my own. Something I learned about myself that now I bring it into every therapy session with other people is that question of, how did you contribute to this problem? Because I know that, speaking of layers, and I think this is why I keep saying things like, in spite of what I'm telling you about my husband, he is not an ogre, and I don't hold him single-handedly responsible for what happened between us. I hold myself 50% responsible, because even if, I was stuck at age 10 because of the traumatic events of my childhood, the reality is I wasn't age 10. I was a young woman who led this man to believe that I was on board with what he was demanding of me. And so you can't blame him for thinking that what he was who I have tried to be. He was someone who just said what he wanted. I want you, and these are my conditions, and do you accept? And I'm the one that was like, yes, I accept. And it would have been a different story if I had been able to say, no, I do not accept. But so, speaking of layers, I think a lot when I think about my marriage, but also when I think about any situation I get into any longer, because of course, whether in business, whether in dating, whether if I have a fight with one of my kids, I try to think about, well, what did I do to contribute to this problem? Because I don't believe, there's always some exceptions, but I think in most situations, if you're dealing with otherwise reasonable people, it takes two to tango. And the only thing that you can really do is examine your own contribution to the problem. So that's one of the layers, like, how am I screwing things up for myself along the way? And then the other one is being self-compassionate. I have learned to stop beating myself up. I can be so self-critical and awful. And actually, it's my little sister who says something that I really appreciate. Sometimes if I'm like texting her and I'll be like, oh, I hate myself, I did blah, 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 blah. And she'll say, stop being mean to little Kristin. And it's true. I can be really mean to little me. And so I think about that a lot, and I try to be kind to myself.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's actually not that hard to do once you get your head around it.
Right. Yeah. It's just one of those things that we do start doing so young. I mean, if somebody is like challenging us in that, you don't think about it until you're like, oh yeah, I did do that. Oh yeah, I wouldn't say that to you, you know, and then once you're aware of it, you're like, oh yeah, okay, that does have an impact. Such a big part of it. So in this, you decided to write a book. Talk to me about that moment when you were decided, okay, it's time for me to do this.
Well, so just to clarify, it wasn't, so this is my third book. So going back to being an object versus a subject, my first book that I wrote sprang also from an object subject moment.
Okay.
I won't fill your ears with all the details, because otherwise this podcast is going to be about me rehashing every marital drama that ever happened between us. But we had another marital drama. It was a very painful and upsetting one. And I was also having a health crisis. You probably can't see it, but I had a melanoma on my face.
Oh, wow.
That 3 doctors refused to remove. They said it would mar my beauty. And then it was my mother who has had melanoma, who took one look at my face. She hadn't seen me for a year. She's like, oh my God, we are going straight to the dermatologist. Her dermatologist biopsied it. It was a melanoma. I ended up with 14 stitches and it was whole drama, but I was terrified that it had metastasized, because I had been living with it growing on my face for a year.
Wow.
At the time, my little son was 1.5 years old and my little daughter was 7. And I was terrified that I was not going to live to see them come of age. And the other thing I was terrified of was that I'm going to die and I have still not written the damn book that I have always wanted to write.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing that got me organized to write my first book, which is called Trailing, and it's about becoming an object. It's so interesting now when I look at my own body of work, because every book I have written is actually about the incremental steps of leaving behind being an object and becoming a subject.
Yeah.
But so fast forward then, that was that book came out in 2012.
Okay.
And Object, which is my most recent book, which literally has the title, because this is the book about becoming the subject of your own life. It is an unpacking of the sexual abuse story that I lived and the cover up by the United States State Department, who protected a serial pedophile who went on to rape and abuse many children. It's a whole horrible, awful story. It makes me so mad. And the thing that mobilized me to finally write the damn book was during the Brett Kavanaugh, Kristin. The Donald Trump, grab him by the pussy. And mostly that story about Larry Nassar, the coach for USA Gymnastics, because when I heard that story, that he had been reported
so many times.
He had been reported so many times, and he had been allowed to carry on with impunity, molesting and raping so many young women. And when I learned that, and by then I was out of my marriage, something just like flew off like the seal was broken, and I was furious. And I was like, I am not holding this story quiet any longer. You know, the State Department paid me $20,000. They would say it wasn't hush money, but I did have to sign on the dotted line that I would use that money to get therapy and then not bother them again. And that was so the sexual abuse that the State Department covered up, it came to an end in my life when I was 12. When I was 22, I had a breakdown. That's when the State Department cut me a check for $20,000 and told me to buzz off. And when I was 32, that is when an old friend who was also one of the victims from that original cohort of girls found me over the internet and sent me a link to an article that was in the Boston Herald that our abuser, William Francis Mulcahy, had been arrested on Cape Cod for raping an 8-year-old girl. And that is when, like, any denial that I had still been in over the years that, I mean, I wasn't in denial. It's just that I felt so disempowered. It had, after the way the State Department covered it up and told our parents to shut up and move on, case closed, I just never felt like I was allowed to talk about it. I was in object mode. I don't get to be the subject that blasts this story out of the water. And so that is what mobilized me. All of those things but especially that Larry Nassar story, and then
Yeah.
Trump and the Christine Blasey Ford, Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, just all of it. I'm just so sick of it. I was in Geneva at that time, but of course, Geneva is very close to France. And so I don't know if this story made as big headlines in the States, but in France, it was a huge deal. Dominique Strauss.
Yeah. Yes. It was
that attacked
Yeah.
the housekeeper in the Sofitel. Yeah. I mean, just all of the stories. I'm so sick of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sick of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what got me writing that book.
Well, and it's important because we have to give voice to these things so that other women feel safe talking about their stories and their
Yes.
trauma, and take the stigma off of that and bring voice to it and call out what is wrong and what is harming us. We can't create safe spaces for us without doing that. So thank you for your willingness to talk about that, to share the courage that comes with doing that work. Because it takes a toll, but it's also, I would imagine, when you finally are able to give voice to it and make your own choices on how you're going to handle it, there's an empowerment in it too, I would imagine.
Very much so. Very much so. Writing that book is the best thing that I've done in my adult life in terms of my own healing and liberation.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So on that note, in living out F.E.E.L, finding empowerment, embracing layers, that's our acronym. Talk to me about how coming to this point in your life, how that has impacted your relationship with yourself, as well as your relationship with others.
Oh, wow. So interesting. The way I would say it has, because of course those two things are very much connected. I think the way it affected my relationship with myself is that I just don't really have room anymore for any, what's the way to say it? I don't have space in my life for boundaryless relationships. And the reason I say boundaryless, what I mean is I don't really have anyone in my life anymore where I feel like my boundaries are not being respected. And if I do come up against something uncomfortable, again, whether in personal life or even, because as a therapist, those things can come up when working with clients, people that chronically don't pay their bills, or I am very skillful now at addressing those things directly, or retiring relationships that drain me. I just am not interested any longer in accommodating people that I feel are not making a positive contribution to my lived experience.
Yeah.
And fortunate, that doesn't mean that like people are dropping like flies around me, because most people are wonderful and boundaryful and all of that stuff. But, you do have to, and we started out with the characteristics, all of my life, people told me that I'm an extrovert because I am friendly and communicative and all of that. But it's only been since I released the book and really got in touch, or I shouldn't say when I released the book, when I started writing the book and really started getting in touch with, as I was saying, my stuck points and just how I am and how I want my life to be, that I realized it's not true. I'm not an extrovert. I am an introvert. And what I mean by introvert, I always thought, if you're an introvert, you're like all quiet. But no, it's not that. It's just that I need a lot of space. I need time by myself. I need quiet. I love to read, and I love to just be on my own, reading, thinking, writing. And I'm very protective of my time. I know lots, and I have friends that are very much extroverts, and they get resourced by constantly being around other people. So then, of course, invitations are constantly coming in. Hey, let's meet. Let's go for coffee. And I just say no.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I go, but a lot of the time I'm like, no, I can't make it. I've learned to say, I'm not available, instead of feeling like I have to give an excuse and, explain. I can't. but have
Yeah.
fun, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Did I answer the question? I feel like
Absolutely.
I just
No.
Okay.
No, that was perfect. Absolutely. No, that was so great. Thank you so much. That was great. Okay. We are down to the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
5 activities that nourish me are long, long walks, listening to audiobooks, podcasts, or music. Reading. I read voraciously. I should also say long walks in which I don't listen to anything except the birds. I love I'm a city slicker to my core. I'm a city girl, but I do love being in parks, nature. Another activity that nourishes me is I have lots and lots of plant babies. My house is filled with plants, and I have my balcony or boxes, and I love taking care of my plants. And then I think that's 4. And the last one I would just say is I am so fortunate. And, of course I'm biased, but hey, it's a great bias to have. I've got 2 young adult children that I just love so much. You're not supposed to be your kid's best friend, but at this age, my kids are definitely my best friends. I'm still mama.
Yeah.
We have good boundaries and they respect me as their mom, but I'm so close to them and spending time with them is one of my great joys. I live with my son. He's 20 and he's got his own interesting life going on. And my daughter has an interesting life in London and I go see her as often as I can. So
yeah. I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
I want to feel energized because I've been tired lately. I want to feel motivated because I'm working on a new book. And I also found out that I have osteopenia, so I need to do some weightlifting. I want to feel committed to forcing the medication down my geriatric cat's throat, even though she makes it very difficult every time. But I love her so much. I don't want her to die from her hyperthyroidism. I want to feel organized because I'm so disorganized and I'm doing late stage ADD testing. Because I do think that I am one of those adults who has found the ways to manage, but I think that I actually have undiagnosed ADD. So I do want to work on my organization. And I want to feel healthy because, I'm 55 going on 56. Now I found out that my bones are crumbling, etc. And, I want to be healthy.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I started lifting weights last summer. I added that back into my regime because of that very thing. There's history in my family and I got a bone density scan and they're like, you're on a good track. And I'm like, yes.
Yes.
So it does help.
Do you follow a certain program or do you just go in and whatever?
I do follow a program called the Faster Way. It helps me with my macros and making sure I'm getting enough protein and fiber. And it helps and it plans out the workout. So I'm getting the kind of movement I need. And it mixes up the movement. It's got some cardio. Look that up. Okay. Yeah, it's called the Faster Way. I've got an ambassador number. So if you want, I'll send that information to you.
Okay, yeah, send it to me. That would be great.
I will.
I would love to learn more. Thank you.
All righty. But yeah, I know it's part of, but what I loved about the conversation today, Kristin, is you unfolded so beautifully, organically, how life is a journey. And these things that we learn about ourselves don't always come at one big time. They come in increments over time as we get to know ourselves more, as we start trusting ourselves more, as we, so many of these things lead along the way on this path, on this journey that we go on. So I appreciate you so much sharing so authentically and organically and honestly.
Thank you. And I appreciate
your
interest. Yes, thank you. I mean, I really, really appreciate the opportunity to speak vulnerably about these things.
Absolutely. Tell people where they can find and follow you. And this will also be on our website at embracinglayers.com on the resources page.
So the easiest way to find me is to go to my website. It's KristinDuncombe.com, or I post a lot on my Instagram about my books and about just all the things that we were talking about. And so my Instagram handle is Kristin Louise Duncombe with underscores in between. So Kristin_Louise_Duncombe. And that's probably the easiest way.
Okay.
It's all connected ultimately. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
Well, I do believe that global warming is a thing. It's hot as hell in Paris tonight. And I hope that we are not headed into World War III. That's what I hope.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. It's June when we're recording this, folks. So
yes.
That will make sense. So hopefully when this drops in October, we're all okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear you on that.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being with me today.
For having me. I really appreciate it. We'll be in
Absolutely.
touch.
Yes.
Bye.
And listeners, take good care out there. Listen to what Kristin said. Trust that the journey is ongoing and that you can be the subject in your own life, but be patient with yourself if as that unfolds, as you grow to know yourself more. Thanks so much for your time today, listeners, and have a great day. We'll see you next time here on the F.E.E.L Podcast. Hello, and thank you so much for being with us today on this episode of the F.E.E.L Podcast. If you would like more information on how you can apply these talking points that I share with our guests in each episode to your own life, really utilize this F.E.E.L framework, go to embracinglayers.com, fill out our contact form, and let's set up a free 30-minute consultation to talk about how you can start living your most authentic, organic, healthy, F.E.E.L-fueled life. Thanks again for being with us today. We'll be back to you soon with another episode here on the F.E.E.L Podcast.